For those of us who've lived long enough, we've seen obviously enormous transitions, and we're in a totally new age. Today, as we begin our debate, over 200 billion emails will be sent around the world to every continent. Google, a company that is really just 10 years old, will process over 1 billion searches and stream more than 2 billion videos today. And in the next minute, about 36,000 tweets will be posted on Twitter. So we're now connected as we never have been before. Here in the United States, we've been a leader in both its development and adoption. And the initial structure actually is interesting because it was created really by our own government. And the open nature of the internet can be traced back to our initial decision in the government to relinquish control of what we had invented, so to speak. So to this day, our nation remains a leader in using the internet for innovation and growth. In just over a decade, we've digitalized and networked our entire economy and our entire way of life. Every one of our most critical systems now rely upon these interconnected networks. Power grids, transportation systems, gas pipelines, telecommunications, they all rely on networks to function. They all rely on the internet. Yet the ramifications of this new era remain poorly understood by many, frankly, by most. History teaches us that disruptive technological advancements can bring about both opportunities and also dangers. We cannot let our exuberance blind us from this simple truth. We cannot ignore the part of the equation in this happy adventure of ours that is unpleasant, and this is it. These technological advances can compromise our national security and indeed are already so doing. The connectivity brought about by the internet and the new ability to access anything, combined with our decision as a country to put everything we hold dear on the internet, means that we are now vulnerable in ways that were unfathomable just a few years ago. Yes, we rush to digitalize and connect every aspect of the American economy and way of life. And we've spent little time focusing on what this actually means with respect to our security. We've left ourselves extraordinarily vulnerable, and the consequences, as pointed out by the senator from Connecticut, are devastating. Our intellectual property is our greatest asset as a nation. It's our greatest advantage in the world. It's currently being pilfered and stolen because it's connected to the internet and therefore is unsecured. Well, we didn't think about that, did we? Experts have called this, as the senator from Connecticut said, the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of the world. Dramatic statement, but it's just an absolutely terrifying fact. Terrifying fact. Our most important personal information, including our credit card numbers, our financial data, is now accessible via the internet and is stolen through data breaches that occur all the time. And most importantly, our critical infrastructure, from water facilities and gas pipelines to our electric power grid and communications network, are now vulnerable to cyber attacks, and they are happening. Many of these systems were designed before the internet. In fact, virtually all of these systems were designed before the internet came about, and were never intended to be connected to a network. Yet they are, and therefore they are unsecure. If these systems are exploited via cyber vulnerabilities, lives could be lost. Yes, there's lots of other things that could have happened before that, but this has the potential to be far greater than even the tragedy of 9/11. In recent months, we've learned that hackers penetrated the networks of companies that control our nation's pipelines, gas pipelines. There have been attempts to penetrate the networks of companies that run nuclear power plants. And last year, a foreign computer hacker showed that he could access the control systems of a water facility in Texas with ease. He accomplished this task in minutes at a computer thousands of miles away. Our critical infrastructure is being targeted, and it is vulnerable. Our Major General of our National Guard, James Hoyer, recently shared a frightening story with me. He was talking about his work on cybersecurity, and he said in West Virginia, he learned that a critical infrastructure facility in the state, critical infrastructure facility, that means a really important one, its engineers were being allowed to operate control systems from their home computers. How naive. But who would know? Who would have guessed? The internet and what it has done for our country is unparalleled, but everything we have accomplished in this internet age is now vulnerable and, in starker terms, undoable. We have built a castle in the sand, and the tide is approaching. Our systems are too fragile, too critical, and too vulnerable. It's a recipe for disaster, and it's time to do something about it before it's too late. We've all known about the seriousness of our cyber situation for years. Our national security experts know it, our law enforcement experts know it, and there's a bipartisan agreement that something needs to be done, but that doesn't tell you a lot to make that statement in the Senate. In my capacity, both as a chairman of the Commerce Committee and former chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and still on that committee, I've become very familiar with the threat posed by cybersecurity, and I've been working with my colleagues to address it. For the past 3 years, a number of us have been working with both Republicans and Democratic senators to find common ground on these issues so we can have a bill to get control of this. We've held hearings, we've had markups, we've held countless meetings with the private sector and interest groups. It's an endless, endless process, and that's the staff does 4 times as much. We've been very patient in working to find a compromise, and now is the time to make that compromise happen. It won't happen today. It could happen in the next several days. We know what we need to do, I do believe. So here's what we know right now. The federal government needs to do a better job of protecting its own networks. Companies control most of our nation's critical infrastructure, and they need to do a better job of eliminating cyber vulnerabilities from their systems. There are no clear lines of authority and responsibility in the federal government for cybersecurity, which will cause confusion in the event of a cyber catastrophe. And the private sector and the federal government need to be able to share information about cyber threats. Over the last year, the Committee of Jurisdiction and the Senate have worked together, the committees have worked together to finalize legislation that addresses each of these concerns. Senators Lieberman, Senators Feinstein, Senators Collins, myself have made it a priority, and others, to finish this work together and with a broader group. We believe that every member of this body will be able to support some kind of legislation. We have put legislation before the Senate, but it's subject to change, and in fact may be in the process of changing in a good sense, because we held a long meeting this morning. We're going to have another one tomorrow, perhaps on a daily basis. And the basic thing is that we have taken, what we've done is that we took a more regulated approach. In other words, you have to do this. This is what you should do. This is at what level you should do it. We've taken that away, and we've made it much more voluntary. We've made it a voluntary approach. And some say, well, that's worse than no bill at all, to which I would reply, no, if you incent people properly with a voluntary approach, the pressure to do something is greater, particularly if they have to submit to audits as to the standards of work which they're doing to protect themselves. There are a variety of ways to do this. We could have a council, the DHS council, which would decide what the standard should be. There was some talk this morning about having a convening session called by NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, which is very good at this stuff, to convene the private sector and have those two kind of work out a system. But the NIST has no authority. They have no regulatory authority, so they could just let them come up with their suggestions. And then there was an idea that maybe the DHS could take a look at that and certify it, stamp it with approval or not on basic critical infrastructure. And of course, you'd have to pick out which was the critical infrastructure, because there's lots of it. And so which one would be subject to special regard is something that we still have to work out. This bill is, however it works so far, and I think in the future, is bipartisan. There's some sort of tribulation about let's let bygones be bygones. We've all given up and compromised, and to which my point of view is that some of us have really been working on this for a very, very long time, and we've been joined by others who have very, very good ideas. But don't close off the past or the future. The bill will be bipartisan. It will incorporate the good ideas and suggestions that have been made by many of our colleagues. We've settled on a plan that creates no new bureaucracies. However that plan forms, it'll have no new bureaucracies or heavy-handed regulation. That's already understood. It's premised on companies taking responsibility for securing their own networks with government assistance where necessary. This bill represents a compromise, and it's time to move forward with it. I think, in closing, I think back to the year 2000 and 2001. I was on the Intelligence Committee at the time of 9/11. And, you know, the fact is, and we did reports on all of this, which have never surfaced, but that we know we did them and we know what the facts were, that there were signs of people moving around the country. And they weren't just sort of haphazardly moving around the country. San Diego, certain safe house in San Diego would appear, and then people that were coming and going from there. Then there was the FBI office in Minneapolis and the Moussaoui case. And then what did the FBI office in Minneapolis report to the FBI UBL, Osama bin Laden office in the FBI, and perhaps that didn't happen. We all knew that something was new, and we all knew that the world was getting different, and we knew that danger could come upon us. Our intelligence and national security leadership took these matters very seriously. However, they did not take it seriously enough, nor did we. So then it was too late. 9/11 happened, and the world changed forever. Today, we have a new set of warnings flashing before us with a wide range of challenges to our security and safety, and we once again, face a choice. Act now and put in place safeguards to protect this country and our people, or act later when it's really too late. Obviously, the conclusion is that we must act now. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor.